market is, what the price point is that will be sustained in the market, what the profit margin is, because we're not mature enough to know our costs. And therefore, I don't know what these things in the backlog are really worth. And the dev guy, who's got all his stuff in order and looks like a genius, he's just come and asked me to give him a stack ranked list of things with numbers on it to justify the choice. Right. Believe me, he leaves that meeting, he goes back to his office, he pulls out his sword and his knives and he starts sharpening them up. You need to figure out how to ask a question that the guy on the other side of the table knows how to answer. So if you walk in and you say, 4 weeks from now, what are the 4 things you would like most? That's a question he finds quite easy to answer. Even if he can't put absolute numbers around it. He knows what markets the company's targeting, what things customers are asking for. He has some certainty. You ask someone to stack rank a list of 200 or 300 things, or even just prioritize into like high, medium, and low, it's really hard. It's hard because IT isn't the only part of the company that doesn't have good organizational maturity. It's worth observing that in places where there's been successful enterprise scale rollouts, places like Capital One, the rest of the company is actually very mature. Probably the equivalent of a level 4 lean finance organization. Right? So it was the IT department that was the odd man out there. They were the immature one. Okay, so what's going on with the detail on the tickets here? The yellow tickets are change requests. The electronic ID number is on the ticket so we can track it. The name of the assigned engineer is above it. The date accepted into the system is in the bottom left. So the point where the clock starts ticking and we start measuring the lead time is on there. If something has a bug, that's a blue ticket, and we like to stick the blue tickets beside the things that they're associated with. If something has some other impediment, that's a pink ticket, and we track impediments explicitly, and we stick the pink tickets onto the thing which is blocked. Without getting into too much detail, in Kanban, we tend not to estimate stuff unless it's very important. But what we do is we make a promise to the business that when we accept things, we'll try and deliver them within a given period of time. If that period of time has expired, there's a red asterisk on this board. And what that's doing is it's visually communicating to the team, this thing is already late. What that does is it creates self-expediting. The team automatically prioritizes and pulls work which is later than stuff that's not late. That's a mechanism that was really pioneered by Ellie Goldratt with something the theory of constraints community calls buffer management, which is a horrible name. But the key to it is visual control, self-expediting mechanism. There isn't a manager going around telling people which thing to pull next. They figure that out for themselves, but they come up with a good quality answer because they've got lots of information. In the electronic board that I showed you, the electronic Kanban board that Darren developed, he had 2 symbols. One symbol for 50% of the time has expired, and the other one for 100%, so that we could start expediting things and hopefully deliver them on time. Okay, this picture is from March 2007. And what's significant about it is it's very different from the picture from February. It's much neater. The team has realized that this mechanism was really helping them, and they've ruled off nice, neat lines. They've also added an extra testing stage, the user acceptance testing. They've broken the board out into 2 swim lanes for 2 different, basically sets of funding, different governance rules. The Kanban limits have all changed quite significantly because they've adjusted them, recognizing bottlenecks primarily and waste. Specifically things like the buffer in front of development has been reduced from 3 to 1. The reason for that is that when we started, we believed that development was the bottleneck. And if you know this theory on capacity-constrained resources, you'll know that you need to protect bottlenecks with buffers so that they never become idle. So we created a buffer. Turned out development wasn't the bottleneck. On any given day or week, it was either test or analysis, but not development. Well, empirical adjustment in a Kanban system would say that you don't go from 3 to 0. You go from 3 to 2 and you see whether the system is flowing better or worse. Then you go from 2 to 1 and then from 1 to 0. And you'll see in the subsequent photograph that we went from 1 to 0 and eliminated that buffer altogether. So what's happening when you eliminate a buffer is you reduce the amount of work in progress in the system, which shortens the cycle time. Sanjeev, you talked about Little's law, is that right? No, yeah, so Sanjeev talked about this yesterday, the relationship between cycle time and work in progress that was first shown empirically in 2004 from the Motorola projects that I showed some screens from. This is April. I'm not really sure why the text is going off the top of the screen there. So this is a month later, and you'll now see that the buffer in front of development is gone because development is not the bottleneck. I want to go back here. The guy in the middle of the photograph is Doug Burrows. He was the build engineer. He worked in the config management department. And at Corpus, they had a rule that the code being built to be pushed into the test environment had to be built by a test engineer and deployed into that environment, by a build engineer, and deployed there by that specialist. And that policy had been adopted as a risk management policy because developers kept breaking the test environment in times gone by. So the policy was still in place. And what was happening with this system is work was flowing, but Doug was unavailable to do builds because he had other duties. He was multitasking, not across other projects, but he had other duties, maintaining pre-production environments and installing new equipment. He had about 1 hour a day to do builds, so he wasn't instantly available. And the build ready buffer is new in this picture. Previously it didn't exist, and what was happening is stuff was backing up to be built, and the whole system was coming to a stop. So this is typical in a Kanban system. When you limit work in progress and there's some impediment, everything stops. Very quickly, everything stops. That causes idle time. Idle time causes people to say, I'm idle, why is that happening? And it forces management to figure out why. The why was Doug's non-instant availability. Until we had this system, we wouldn't really have known that developers were stuck, because what the developers would do is they'd leave something on the shelf, they'd go work on something else, and the amount of work in progress would grow. And over a period of time, it would grow and grow and grow, and cycle times would get longer. And then people would wake up and say, gee, do you remember when we used to build stuff a lot faster around here? And nobody manages to relate the cause and effect of why something went wrong and how it went wrong, because it crept up on them very, very slowly. This stops this from happening. So it led to a discussion around, why is Doug not instantly available? Is it a good idea that he has these other jobs? Should he be permanently assigned to this? Well, that wouldn't be very efficient. The short-term solution was to insert a buffer in front of Doug with 7 items in it. That allowed the work to build up all day, and he could build those 7 things the following day in the 1 hour he had available. That's a symptomatic fix. The root cause fix would be to figure out how to make him instantly available. A policy change, perhaps, to say that he only does this work, he's dedicated. What we decided to do was automate his role out of existence, make this all basically one-touch build and deploy into the test environment. That's easy to say, relatively non-trivial to do in an enterprise scale environment with a very heterogeneous set of systems. Okay, the next significant thing is, here in April, we now have another whiteboard. And what's happened is, that the front end of the system, which was the business analysis group, the people that wrote the requirements outside of the IT department, they had come along and said, gee, we like what you're doing with this Kanban thing, can we be part of that party? And we had to make another board. So on there we now have an input queue for business requirements to be developed, and we've got some in progress and some completed. And these people started attending the stand-up meeting. Nobody asked them to. Nobody dictated it to them. I didn't go to my boss, who didn't go to his colleague, the CFO, who didn't instruct the VP of the PMO to tell the business analyst manager to tell his people to start attending these meetings. Nobody asked. Because we were transparent and they could see it was having a benefit, and there was a lot of enthusiasm in the IT group for it, they wanted to be part of it, and they came and asked. So suddenly I was beginning to unravel this challenge that Scott Relf, the CMO of Sprint PCS, had laid down to me. How do you influence people that you have no positional power over? How do you get them to change without forcing them? Right, this was my first big clue. Sometime that month, there was a request for the finance department. You need to understand the org structure. CFO, VP of Finance, Controller, two different sets of org. Someone in this org wrote the requirements, someone in this org was responsible for using that software and doing the user acceptance testing. Request went the whole way through the system into UAT, and the user turned around and said, this is not what we need. And of course that never ever happens anywhere, right? It was also so obvious why it had happened. Well, because of the transparency we had and all the reporting and the operations review and the weekly meetings with the business owners to do prioritization, everybody got to find out. They got to see how far it had gone, what it had cost, the displacement effect of we worked on that rather than something else we could have been working on. And the net outcome was, first of all, the team was so upset, they created a waste bin and they stuck the ticket in here with the thing saying wrong requirements. Nobody asked them to create that waste bin, but they felt it was important. We also started to produce electronic reports that were available on the internet electronically. You could get this through Outlook if you were interested. And we brought those reports to the weekly meeting with the business. Within about 5 weeks, the business had come to realize it was really, really important to give us good quality on the input. Because if they wasted our time and capacity and resources, we were working on something that they didn't want or didn't need, when we could have been working on something that they did want and did need. So without asking them to improve the quality of the requirements and think harder about requests before they sent them to us, they cleaned up their act and started doing it on their own. And all we did to make that happen is present them with the data, show them the process, let them see the impact, and give them a weekly report that they could see. What started to happen, and this was not instant, I find people come to my presentations and they hear me talk about Kanban system at XIT or the Kanban system at Corbis, and those case studies are 18 months to 2 years. They hear me talk about all this stuff, they go back, they try and do it all in their office the following week, and then they write to me and ask me why it's not working. So don't expect spontaneous quality circles to start instantly, but this is a concept in manufacturing that exists in very, very few lean manufacturing companies. Toyota would be a good example, but there really aren't many. It's like the holy grail of lean manufacturing culture. It's the point where the workforce feels so empowered and have so much information about the performance of the organization that when they see problems, they set about solving them and making suggestions on how to improve on their own. In fact, at Toyota, they're so empowered, they just go and implement them. The idea of Kaizen means continuous improvement. And a true Kaizen culture is one where people are empowered to make their own improvements. Toyota has some wonderful statistics on this. From about 4 years ago, 70,000 employees in the company, I think something like 75,000 improvement suggestions implemented from 98% of the workforce participating in the Kaizen program. Now, if you compare that with some big American companies where they do Six Sigma, they have some kind of drop your improvement suggestion in the box. And once a month, they have a committee meeting where they look through the suggestions and they pick out the best ones, and they make a project around each suggestion, and they appoint a black belt to run the project, and the black belt hires a bunch of green belts and some other people from the company to run the improvement project. The participation rate in those schemes is down in the sort of single unit percentages, and 10, 20% of the workforce. The number of improvements implemented is measured in the tens, 20s, or hundreds. Meanwhile, people puzzle over, gee, I visited this Toyota plant a month ago and I'm back again and everything's different. How did that happen? Well, it happened because the workforce was empowered. So that started to happen at Corbis, and it got better and better. And just to come back to Doug Burrs again, there was one day we were having operations review. Meeting finished at 10:30 in the morning. It's off-site. Took me a half hour to get back to my desk, usually because people would come talk to me and we'd talk as we walked back to my office. I got back to my desk, sat down, pulled out, opened my email. At the top of the inbox, there was an email from Doug. And it was a very apologetic sounding email. And it said, David, that problem that came up towards the end of the meeting, going down in the elevator afterwards, a few of us got talking and we figured out what the problem was. And we realized it was a relatively easy fix, so we've gone in to the config management system and the environment. We've made the following changes. We've deployed them already. Will that be okay? At that point, my job was really done there. When you've got to that point with the workforce that you're not telling them what to do and they're continuously improving, you have achieved a Kaizen culture. So there's a list here of some examples of spontaneous quality circle Kaizen events, and some of them are really small and didn't make a big difference, and other ones are very significant. We got a 20% productivity improvement because the team got upset that after we did a release, normally you do a release, it goes out and it's got no bugs in it. The next day the team would be in the office and they'd all be happy. We've done a release and no bugs in it, and how wonderful we are. Well, with the Kanban system, we found that pretty quickly, the day after a release, they're all standing around at the stand-up meeting and they've got kind of nothing to say and they're kind of shrugging their shoulders. Turned out most of the team were idle because there was a policy that said after a release, we freeze the test environment for 3 days. And therefore, for 2 days after a release, nothing was flowing through the system. We're doing releases every 2 weeks. So a 2-day penalty is 20%. 3 people got together and decided to think about why this was, and they'd been with the company a while. They came to me and said, this policy is historic. It's all about the days when we released stuff, and it was very buggy, and we'd have lots of emergency hot fixing to do. So we had to keep production, staging, and test all mirrored. Now that we do high quality releases, we're recommending that 1 day would be enough. So I sent an email memo that afternoon saying we'll only do 1 day of test freeze. We got 20% productivity improvement out of that very simple policy change. So from May to September, not much change. What this is telling me is that this one Kanban system had really stabilized. They'd figured out where the bottlenecks were, where the waste was, they'd eliminated a lot of it. The one thing is, the other whiteboard is gone. In that 5 months, we had managed to politically collapse our system analysis and business analysis team into one, and then over a period of months, we had eliminated the job title differences. We had shortened the value stream. We had moved to a more generalist workforce. Now, there's still a lot of work to do because there's a lot of specialization in here. but we'd made an improvement. It was a very significant discontinuous improvement. Right? Doing something like changing the policy on, is it 1 day or 3 days for the test environment freeze, that's a little simple continuous improvement. A discontinuous one is where you say, we're going to eliminate this whole department and that job title. A non-trivial thing to do. A lot of the Agile literature, and people in my position in the Agile community will come along to audiences like you and say, just don't bother with specialists, make everyone a generalist. Or a generalizing specialist, that would be better. Well, that's a non-trivial thing to do. You're talking about retraining someone essentially with a whole set of new skills. So, I don't give people that kind of advice lightly, because I've been there, I've managed those kind of departments, I've faced those challenges. Right. So, we did Kanban on sustaining engineering maintenance work. All the early Kanban systems were maintenance. And we've pretty much come to the conclusion that it's a really cool way to do maintenance. Why would you do it on major projects? I have no evidence whatsoever that you'll get better productivity out of a team using Kanban than a team doing Scrum, or Scrum and XP, or feature-driven development. In fact, to get what Jeff Sutherland describes as hyper-productivity took me more than a year at Corbis, where I'd achieved it at Motorola using positional power within maybe 6 weeks. So, why would you do the Kanban on major projects? Organizational maturity. Kanban creates this Kaizen culture that allows you to achieve high maturity, and I want to get to that. This is an example of an early Kanban on a major project. We call this Scrumban. It's Scrum on the outside and Kanban on the inside. So it's 1 month sprints, and it's all organized and prioritized and delivered like Scrum. But in between, we're doing, on a day-to-day basis, we're doing Kanban. So this was the beginning, and it's hard to see with the writing over it. You've got the workflow running left to right. You've got exit criteria for different stages written at the bottom, which turns out to be really important when you're doing a pull system. This is 5 months later, and you'll notice significant change in the whiteboard. There was this continuous improvement happening on that team. We had the same cultural thing. And they've introduced this swim lane mechanism, and what they're doing now is they're assigning individuals or small teams to some requirement, and then they're flowing them through specification, development, build, and test without handing it off. And that turned out to be an improvement in some ways, and it turned out to be inefficient in other ways. But again, it was the team's own innovation. Management wasn't telling them, and more or less they really weren't asking permission. Certainly it was not bubbling up to my level in the company. Right? I didn't get to know that they'd introduced swim lanes until I turned up and saw them. This is another major project. This was a big project. From just my department, more than 50 people. There was a vendor involved with maybe another 50 or plus more. It was a $30 to $40 million project, maybe about 10 or 11 million of my own budget, if you include full-time headcount and discretionary spending on outsource from a company whose logo I can see in front of me at the moment. Anyway, what's going on here is a two-tiered Kanban system where the green tickets are customer recognizable requirements. Let's call them minimal marketable features or epic stories, that sort of level. And then the team is elaborating those and breaking them into these yellow tickets that they refer to as features, although not to be confused with features in FDD. And you could think of these more like just regular user stories. So this was early in the project, and we've got sort of in analysis, in development, and then we've got test and deployed. In the green, you can't see it in the photograph. And then in the lower level, all the green tickets which are in development are being elaborated into yellow tickets. And there's a proposed list, and then there's active, which is designed and coded, resolved, which is in test, and closed, which is ready for integration. 5 months later, again, significant change. Oh, no, is that the right way? Yeah. The project with the swim lanes got cancelled, and more than half of that team got assigned to this other major project. 1 week after that happened, this happened to the whiteboard. They brought their swim lane best practice and they influenced their colleagues to adopt it. And they made some changes to it while they were at it because they'd learned some stuff. Now we can see things like the name of the engineers assigned on the knowledge ticket. The entire, the requirements are here, the names of the team members with the team lead. Each one of these swim lanes you can think of like a scrum team, sort of 3 to 6 developers with a team lead in charge. The vendor had another part of the project they were doing all on their own. And it was a bit of a mess. There were a lot of bugs. They wanted to deploy it. We didn't want them to deploy it with bugs because that's not what we did at Corbis. And we forced them to fix it, and we encouraged them to introduce a whiteboard to track the bugs. These are all bugs in blue. We've got proposed, active, resolved, which are in test. This is not all of them. This was only the ones they were working on. There were 500 of them, if I remember rightly. The pink tickets are issues. Why are the issues in a different column on the board? Turns out that the issues were affected so many of the blue tickets, they couldn't stick them to the blue tickets, so they adapted the process, they did it differently. This was day 1 of introducing, in this stabilization phase of, you guys better fix these bugs before the deployment or else. This was day 2. Somebody realized that the swim lane technique that was being used on 2 other floors of the building was really cool and we should adopt it. And they broke out swim lanes for different areas of the functionality. And we've still got active and resolved, and the pink tickets are still on the far right. Okay, so I want to talk about organizational maturity. There is? Yeah.
Question for you. You know, when you talk about the Kanban and the Kaizen, what hits me is what's the difference between Kanban, Scrumban, or Scrum. You know, you're paying attention on the storyboard. People are actually looking at the storyboard not as a way of managing the features as much as, which they are, but they're also looking at it as a way of managing the process. There's visibility to management, and there's this continuous process improvement, not like, well, let's wait till the end of the sprint.
Absolutely.
And when I hear Scrum described by more or less most Scrum consultants anyway, it seems to me that we use the storyboard to manage our product backlog, we use the retrospection, which is a continual process improvement, but not a continuous process improvement. And I'm really wondering when I hear you, if it's not so much a difference between Kanban or Scrum, or that you have this value stream where you've got visibility by management and visibility by the team, to use that as a process improvement technique on a continuous basis.
So, if there's a question hiding in there, it's the...
Well, I guess I'm asking if you're kind of...
I know, I'm not trying to insult you.
Okay, no,
I'm just trying to express it for the audience and the people who are watching the video. Is the, you know, do you really need to be doing Kanban to get the cultural stuff, right? And there's a reason why the word Kanban does not appear in the title of this presentation. Because I agree with you. If someone says to me, how do you create a culture for high maturity? I will tell them that you need to map the value stream and you need to make that available transparently to everyone. You need to let every player in the value stream and the management chain above see how the mechanism works. And in this case, I'm using Kanban as the mechanism, but some other mechanism like Scrum would probably work equally well. The thing is, I haven't tried that, and I don't have the case studies to talk about it. But the general principle is the whiteboard and the visualization isn't just there to manage the backlog and get the iteration done. It's there to expose the mechanism of the process and let all the value stream partners understand how it works and let them understand how their actions affect it. Great question, Alan. Okay, so a lot of people in the Agile community believe that the organizational maturity model, the CMM, CMMI, has nothing to do with them. And that it really embodies the enemy. And I've come to the conclusion that unless you achieve what the SEI, Software Engineering Institute, refers to as high maturity, you cannot sustainably scale Agile to large enterprise, and you can't create an Agile business. In other words, the C-level execs that I talk to at some of the world's biggest companies, their complaint is, we're doing all this Agile software development, it's not improving our bottom line. You go down to the Agile software developers, they'll tell you how wonderful they are at XP. They'll show you all their practices and their artifacts to prove it. They'll present case studies at conferences. People will congratulate them on how wonderful they are. It's not making a significant difference to the business they're working for. Right? So how, organizational maturity is relevant. I've come to that conclusion because you need to have the equivalent of level 4 in the CMMI to be doing the things I've just shown you. Right? Continuous improvement, Kaizen, that would be level 5. Measuring things objectively would be level 4. We'll see that, right? So achieving high maturity is essential for enterprise scale Agile success. What I've observed is Agile teams get really good at doing low-level things in the capability maturity model. And this is a list of some examples. These are process areas from CMMI levels 2 and 3. Project planning, measurement and analysis, verification, validation, the list goes on, requirements management, config management, product integration, technical solution, which is their word for design. Agile teams do this stuff pretty well. This is about CMMI level 2.5. Ken Schwaber stood in front of this audience yesterday morning and told you Scrum is CMM level 3. No, he's 8 years behind the times and hasn't caught up with the eye, which means that he's at least 2 versions behind. Scrum is not level 3. There is no Agile method that's level 3. The most complete Agile method for CMMI is the MSF CMMI method in the Visual Studio Team System product. It covers about 70% of the required evidence in levels 2 and 3. And it has some level 4 and 5 aspects to it, but the point is that even a method that was designed explicitly to meet level 3 and actually meets it better than anything else on the market, even from the formal community. You go to the SEI's SCPG conference, there's a bunch of vendors there selling tools and processes that will help you get to level 3 or level 5. The out-of-the-box processes don't meet as many of the process area evidence requirements as MSF CMMI does. It's by far and away the best one, and it only does 70%. Right? Other Agile methods don't even get close. You need to fill in the gaps. The big clue is anything with a no on the front of it, like with the word organization on the process areas, you can't tool it. And generally, the Agile methods don't even talk about organization. They talk about projects. So there's work to be done. But Agile teams do get good at this stuff. I meet teams in large organizations that do XP and Scrum, and they can do all of this. That's about most of level 2 and half of level 3. So there we are, the lower maturity levels. Apparently the opposite of high is not low, because low maturity would be level 1. Okay, so areas Agile teams are weak at. Decision analysis and resolution. The idea that you need to make a decision about something like your architecture, so you evaluate a bunch of alternatives and you use objective criteria to choose the winner. Agile teams are not good at that stuff. This is a relatively high maturity discipline. You need a lot of slack in your schedule. You need to be able to deliver regularly. You need a high velocity. You need to be good at a bunch of things that we know that we set out to be good at in Agile to do this stuff. Integrated project management. Scrum of Scrums, it's not really there. Training program, Agile community has nothing to say about this. Supplier agreement management. The concept of Agile contracts and Agile contracting is a new hot topic that's beginning to appear in some conferences. And there's now a Yahoo group to discuss it. and there's something going on the InfoQ website to build a community around this. We're talking about 2 or 3 handfuls of people who are actively talking about how to manage suppliers in an agile way. And finally, this. The Agile community loves to talk about impediments, but when you poke that with a stick, you find out that it doesn't go much deeper than, yes, we list the impediments and the Scrum Master's responsible. The issue management aspect is not nearly as well looked after as it needs to be really be level 3. And we're not very good at risk management. Risk management's a bit of a hand waving of, oh, we do the most valuable things first or the most technically risky things first. Therefore, we have a risk management policy. We're not good at this stuff, right? That's why Barry Bohm's put a lot of effort into his Agile plus risk management, which is a solution for a lot of enterprise scale stuff. And Philippe talked about, he's not here anymore, talked about Agile not being good for critical systems, basically anything with a high cost of failure and significant risk, because the Agile literature's not good. Ken Schwaber came along yesterday and said, you know, the problem is that when we moved to Agile, we left a whole bunch of that useful stuff behind. And the one he called out as an example was risk management. That's why Agile methods don't get you to level 3. If you want to pick 2 really obvious holes, decision analysis and resolution and risk management are the 2 most obvious. Really, the only people writing about this stuff are guys like Barry Bohm. Okay, so achieving high maturity requires a shift in culture and mindset. Right, because this is the thing, level 4 requires you to be quantitatively managed and deliver predictable results. Now, this word predictable is heavily misunderstood. In common language, people think predictable means that you deliver on what you promised, you made some commitment and you delivered that. Therefore, you have some magical crystal ball and you can gaze into it and you can see the future. And because you're a level 4 organization, your crystal ball works really accurately and you make a promise that you deliver on. What the SEI actually means by the word predictable is a low degree of variation. So let's say that you're plotting a velocity chart for your team. And over the course of a sprint, it goes kind of low, low, high, 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 up and down, and then maybe really high, and then low again at the end as you start the next one. That's a large amount of variation. A really narrow amount of variation would be a graph that kind of went like this the whole way along. And I've got graphs that look like both of these from feature-driven development teams over the years. Right? Being predictable means that you have a low degree of variation. Low degree of variation means that you can use arithmetic and do some mathematics and you can predict the outcome of how many stories will we get finished within some band of variation, and you can make a promise which you've got a high chance of delivering on, but not absolute certainty. So level 4 is quantitatively managed. That means you have objective data, you take that data and you use it in a statistically sound manner to make decisions, and that you have a low degree of variability, and that produces predictable results. Predictable results are interesting. Low degree of variation implies that you're much less likely to overshoot a schedule, or if you're being smart, you don't need as big a buffer in your schedule to guarantee you'll deliver. What the PMBOK refers to as management reserve can be a smaller amount when you have a low degree of variation. So here is the shock news for the Agile community. Predictable level 4 organizations deliver faster than lower maturity level 2 or level 3 organizations. And if agility is all about lead time and our ability to respond to something happening in the market, that means that level 4 organizations should be more agile than lower ones. The should be is, let's avoid that bureaucracy creeping in. Right, predictability allows a team to be more agile to respond to change faster. Okay, so level 4 also requires that there's a long-term organizational learning, and this requires recording of key decisions. Because the Agile community's tacit knowledge approach to this would mean that you never have any staff turnover, and that all those staff have, infinitely perfect memory. Right? There is a requirement to write things down. If you're doing decision analysis and resolution, write down the choices, write down the criteria, write down how you scored it, record the decision, so that 9 months later when someone says, gee, that architectural choice we made was a bad choice, why did we choose that? You can actually go back and understand why you made that choice and evaluate whether you would do it differently given what you know now 9 months later. So without institutional learning, mistakes get repeated. And if you're repeating mistakes, you're not continuously improving. So level 5 represents continuous improvement, and Kaizen means continuous improvement. And as far as I know, and I've been around this for a while, the Agile community believes in continuous improvement and always has done. So the bottom line is that the goals of the SEI, the CMMI movement, the Lean movement, the Agile movement, they're all the same goals. But you don't get to be continuously improving by magic. I have a client who's very good at extreme programming. They've been good at it for several years. They've had some of the best coaching available in the world on extreme programming. They do 2-week iterations, they hold retrospectives. They're great. Over a 2-year period, they have refined themselves to almost perfect textbook extreme programming. And every 2 weeks or so, they get just a little bit more better at doing extreme programming. They are not a level 5 continuously improving organization. Right? They're still only a level 3 organization. If they were really a level 5 organization, they would be innovating and solving the other problems. And if you go back 2 years later, the method they're using wouldn't be recognizable from the one they're using now. Right, that's the difference, right? A real level 5 organization will challenge itself on how it's doing things and will innovate. So, many Agile teams I see fail to embrace objective quantitative management. They do retrospectives, but the retrospectives are all subjective. They're all about how did we feel, they're all anecdotal, they're little stories about what happened in the last 2 weeks or the last 4 weeks. They're not based on objective data. You don't get to be level 4 without the objective data. And my observation is that without that level 4 maturity, and I'm not suggesting you go get an appraisal, but recognize that you need to be objective, quantitatively managed, and produce low variability, predictable results. Without that level of maturity, you don't get the scale, you don't get those magic things we started to see at Corbis where people would come and say, we want to be part of this party. We want to collaborate with you guys in ways that hadn't been happening. Right? Subjectivity and some degree of heroic effort is required to achieve results. The number of Scrum teams I meet where they tell you that they work overtime in the last week of the sprint is remarkable. Then they'll tell you that they slack off the first week of the next sprint in order to recover from the overtime they work. And they will, I've seen guys on stage say this, that's a sustainable pace. Apparently, if your feet are in the oven and your head's in the freezer, you're comfortably warm. So what measures does Kanban use to facilitate quantitative measurement and predictability? Let's go through this quickly. This is a cumulative flow diagram. There's 2 of them here from the Kanban system. This is what you would expect. The pink area is the work in progress, and it's very flat looking with occasional bulges because the management decided to break the limits for one reason or another. Sometimes those are good reasons, sometimes they're bad. Also, the business occasionally triages the backlog because they can see it. This is just a collection of stickies that have been completed. This is the issue management cumulative flow diagram from Visual Studio Team System. The red band here is the number of open issues, the number of open impediments, and the blue line is the number of items being impeded. This is a really good health check on how good you are at impediment removal. And if this is flat and there aren't any impediments, I don't believe you. Right? That should be the management attitude. Things are being held up. Okay, this was our executive dashboard at Corbis. This is the throughput in terms of change requests delivered. The red part is late, the green part is on time. We reported the target SLA is 30 days, the average, which was sort of 32 and a half there. Then the due date performance, which in this case was actually very low, and I don't have time to get into the story of that. This is just revisiting the cumulative flow. You can see the lead time is shortening and then it starts to lengthen again. You need this kind of data to be able to analyze problems. This is mean lead time over a number of months in 2007. The reason for the big jump is fully explainable by something that I don't have time to go into, but the point is it was very objective, and we could see this at the Ops review. We knew there'd been a problem with something very large, and then we saw it immediately in the data. The thing is that averages can be misleading, so it's worth plotting the spectrum. This is the spectrum of lead time for change requests in March and April 2007 with the target of 30 days displayed in the red line. What you'll see from this is that there are some statistical outliers. Meanwhile, there's a big cluster of things that were only sort of 10 to 15 days late. Well, without being an expert in statistical process control, you can quantitatively manage this by saying there's a pretty good chance that these things are special cause variations and we shouldn't worry about them too much. And that most of these things are probably common cause variations and they're systemic. So what I did with this is I directed the line management to go figure out what the root cause was of why these things were late. There might only be 2 or 3 things causing a lot of things to take longer. And could we make changes? Right, so a lot of people think CMMI level 4 requires you to be doing statistical process control. It doesn't. But it does require you to be able to justify your actions and to show some quantitative things. So if we decided to focus on what's the root cause of these things, we're justifying it on the basis that this is a cluster, and if we could make a change, we might move a bunch of these down, and that's a significant improvement. And we're not going to care about the other things because they're entirely explainable. This is the lead time, touch time ratio. It's that efficiency metric. We had a lot of trouble measuring this at Corbis. We had 3 different methods. We never got it above sort of 40 to 50%. At Microsoft, the XIT group, we got it to 90%, which was amazingly good. So I don't have a really good story to tell about gathering this data and using it to effect change. But it is a relatively interesting report card. I want to talk just towards the end here about the prioritization mechanism and how it affected culture. So remember that, pick the 4 things that you most want this week. The group making that decision went through 3 stages that I call bargaining, democracy, and collaboration. And I wrote about this in a Cutter IT Journal article that's available on my website. The first 8 weeks, they'd come along and say, I know there's only 1 slot free, but I've got 2 small ones, could you just do them both? Well, somebody else at the table would say, why should they get your 2 small ones? And I'd say, I'm not even going to size these, we're not wasting time on that, you get 1. They gave up on that, and they decided amongst themselves that democracy would be good. So if there's 3 slots, let's give all the different competing business units 3 votes each. And what happened is they started lobbying their colleagues. They would narrow down the 3 or 4 things they most wanted selected, and they'd start coming to the meetings with PowerPoint slides or little business cases printed out, some justification. They started wining and dining their colleagues and lobbying them on the Thursday or Friday before the Monday meeting in order to garner support.
thought you weren't allowed to talk anymore. Unfortunately, I think that means that we actually have to leave the building. Okay. Hang on, let me find out what's.
Okay. I've only got 2 slides of content left. So, the third stage was collaboration, where it turned out democracy didn't elect the best candidate. And everyone got to realize that we'd wasted time and effort on something that was a poor choice. So these very senior people in the company, they're all VPs, decided that they actually knew what the company was doing. They knew about the strategic plans, the marketing objectives. They had lots of information about different departments, and they started working collaboratively. So they'd sit down and say, what's the lead time right now? And we'd say 44 days, and they'd say, okay, what's the most important thing we're doing as a business 44 days from now? And they'd come to some conclusion based on the knowledge they had. And they would then look through the backlog and say, well, there's one thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. An alarm has been sounded. We are currently investigating the alarm. Please remain in corridors and await further instructions. Once again, an alarm has been sounded. We are investigating. Please remain in corridors and await further instructions. Thank you for your patience.
We're going to call this a corridor. So these. Okay, so the point here is that the system proved remarkably robust to gaming because more than one product owner kept the other ones honest. And the transparency kept everyone else honest. So we got a lot of cultural change. Some of these other things I didn't talk about, like policy changes a little bit. And we got cross-functional collaboration, and we got continuous improvement. We got a Kaizen culture.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. The alarm you're hearing is being investigated. Please remain in corridors and await further instructions. Once again, the alarm you're hearing is being investigated. Please remain in corridors and await further instructions. Thank you.
So if there's a message I want you to take away, it's high maturity is not achieved through positional power and acquiescence. Right? And Kanban is emerging as a method for achieving agility and high maturity and enabling that ground-up Kaizen continuous improvement culture. Don't come along and impose a process on people. Teach them about bottlenecks, teach them about variability, teach them about waste, and give them a mechanism to expose that to everyone that's involved, and they'll make their own changes. Right? Kaizen culture emerges, and Kanban has enabled teams to break through to the equivalent of level 4 maturity. That's the message, and that's why I would do it on major projects, rather than things I've tried in the past, like impose feature-driven development process using my positional power and making people acquiesce. There's some more information on various websites, and I listed off some of the key thinkers in this space on the slides. I gave these slides to Philippe, so they'll be available on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, David. There's